My dad looked me straight in the eyes at my grandmother's funeral and said 8 words that shattered my entire life. "I didn't think she'd ever find you." The woman sitting next to me, the one who'd just shown me a photo of her missing daughter, was still waiting for my response. My hands were shaking so hard I had to grip the church pew to steady them. The funeral program slipped from my lap and hit the floor with a soft flutter that somehow seemed louder than the organ music filling the sanctuary. Everything about that moment is burned into my memory. The smell of lilies mixed with old wood polish, the way the February sunlight streamed through the stained glass, casting purple and gold shadows across my father's face. The sound of my Aunt Vera gasping beside me when she overheard what he said. "I'm Brenna, and I'm 28 years old. At least that's who I thought I was until 60 seconds ago. I teach 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary, the same school where I once learned my multiplication tables and made macaroni art for Mother's Day. A Mother's Day gift for a woman who, as I was about to learn, wasn't actually my mother at all. The woman next to me, Nadine, had salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun and wore a simple black dress that looked like she'd bought it specifically for attending strangers' funerals. Because that's what she did, she would tell me later. She went to funerals in small towns, searching faces, looking for her daughter. 28 years of searching, and she'd finally found me in a church in rural Pennsylvania, at the worst possible moment, on a day when we were supposed to be saying goodbye to my grandmother, Rosalie. My father, Dale, sat frozen beside me, his construction worker hands clenched into fists on his thighs. This man who had taught me to ride a bike in the parking lot behind the old Sears, who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding just last year, who had never once forgotten my birthday in 28 years, had just admitted to something unthinkable with those 8 simple words. The funeral hadn't even started yet. People were still filing in, whispering condolences, adjusting their winter coats on the backs of pews. My cousin Garrett was up near the casket, placing a photo of Grandma from her teaching days. The church secretary was testing the microphone at the podium. Normal funeral things were happening all around us while my entire world collapsed in slow motion. Nadine's hand reached for mine. Her fingers were ice cold, and I could feel her pulse racing through her palm. She'd been carrying a photo of a baby for nearly 3 decades, and now she was touching that baby's grown hand for the first time since she was stolen. Because that's what I was, apparently. Not Brenna, the small-town teacher who grew up on Maple Street. I was Harmony, a stolen baby who'd been living someone else's life. The organ music shifted to a hymn I'd sung 100 times in this very church, but the words wouldn't come. How do you sing about heaven and angels when you've just discovered your whole life is built on a lie? The morning started like any funeral morning. Black dress, waterproof mascara, and that hollow feeling in your chest that comes with losing someone you love. My grandmother Rosalie had passed away the previous Tuesday after a long battle with cancer, and our small town of Millbrook came together the way small towns do. Casseroles appeared on doorsteps, flowers arrived from people who hadn't spoken to our family in years, and the church parking lot filled up 40 minutes before the service. I arrived early with my husband Trevor to help set up the photo displays. Grandma Rosalie had been a teacher for 43 years, and we'd gathered pictures from throughout her career. There she was in 1975 with her first class, wearing that green polyester dress she'd kept in her closet until the day she died. Another from 1989, surrounded by students at the school science fair. The last one from her retirement party, where she'd made everyone cry with her speech about how teaching wasn't just her job, it was her calling. "Your dad's here," Trevor whispered, squeezing my shoulder. I watched Dale walk through the church doors, his one good suit slightly wrinkled, his face drawn with grief. Grandma Rosalie had been more than his mother. She'd been his anchor after my mother died. At least after the woman I thought was my mother died. The church filled quickly. Mrs. Patterson from the post office took her usual spot in the 5th row. The Hendricks family, who owned the hardware store, filed in with their 3 kids. My best friend Janine arrived with her parents, giving me that sad smile people give you when they want to help, but know they can't fix anything. The familiar faces were comforting in their predictability. This was my community, my history, my people. I took my seat in the 3rd row at exactly 10:45, 15 minutes before the service would start. Dad sat on my left, his calloused hand briefly covering mine in a gesture of comfort. Aunt Vera settled on my right, already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief she'd embroidered herself. Behind us, I could hear my cousin Garrett's kids asking their mother why everyone was so sad. That's when I noticed her, the woman who didn't fit. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, scanning the room with an intensity that seemed odd for a funeral. She wasn't crying. She wasn't checking her phone or looking for someone to sit with. She was studying faces, one by one, like she was memorizing them or searching for something specific. Her clothes were appropriate, but somehow off, like she'd Googled what to wear to a funeral and followed the instructions exactly. When her eyes landed on me, she stopped. Not a pause, but a full stop, like someone had pressed a button and frozen her in place. Her hand went to her chest, and I saw her mouth form a word I couldn't hear over the organ music. She walked toward our pew with deliberate steps, never taking her eyes off me. There were empty seats throughout the church, but she chose the one directly beside me. The proximity felt intentional, almost invasive. I could smell her perfume, something floral and old-fashioned, like roses left too long in a vase. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. Her voice had this tremor to it, like she'd been crying for years, though her eyes were dry now. "Thank you," I replied, assuming she was one of Grandma's former colleagues, or maybe someone from her church quilting group. "How did you know my grandmother?" She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "I didn't. I saw the obituary online. Sometimes I attend services when I'm passing through towns. It helps me process my own grief." It was an odd thing to say, but grief makes people do odd things. I'd once eaten an entire birthday cake, alone in my car after my college roommate's funeral. Who was I to judge someone else's coping mechanisms? "You have such distinctive features," she said suddenly, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "That birthmark on your neck, the scar above your lip. You look just like my daughter." I touched the small scar above my lip reflexively, a habit I'd developed whenever someone mentioned it. The story I'd been told my whole life was simple. A swing set accident when I was 3, 4 stitches at the county hospital, and a faint white line that never quite faded. "Thank you," I said, giving her what I hoped was a polite but conversation-ending smile. "Your daughter must be beautiful then." Her face crumpled like paper being crushed in a fist. She was. She was taken from me 28 years ago. The words hung in the air between us. 28 years ago. The math was already doing itself in my head without my permission. I was 28 years old, born July 15th of 1996 at Millbrook General Hospital or so, my birth certificate claimed. "That's terrible. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Not lost," Nadine corrected, her voice gaining strength. "Taken. Stolen. Someone broke into our house while my husband and I were sleeping and took her from her crib. Is 6 months old. The police said it was probably a black market adoption ring. They said she was probably sold to someone desperate for a baby." My stomach twisted. Dad shifted uncomfortably beside me, his breathing suddenly audible. I wanted to move away from this woman, but I was trapped between her and Aunt Vera, who was listening now too, her funeral program forgotten in her lap. Nadine pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Her name was Harmony, Harmony Rose Thorne, born January 15th, 1996. Not July, like you might have been told. "I was born in July," I said quickly. But even as the words left my mouth, something cold was creeping up my spine. I'd never seen my original birth certificate. Dad always said it was in the safety deposit box at the bank, but whenever I'd needed it for school or my license, he'd always been the one to get it. She showed me the photo on her phone screen, a baby with bright eyes and wisps of dark hair, and there, clear as day, was a birthmark on her neck. Port wine colored, shaped like a butterfly with uneven wings. I had the exact same mark in the exact same place. I'd always joked it looked like someone had spilled wine on me before I was born. "Lots of people have birthmarks," Dad said, his voice too loud for the hushed pre-funeral atmosphere. "This is hardly the time or place for whatever you're trying to do here." Nadine swiped to another photo. This one was computer-generated, one of those age progression images you see on missing person posters. The face staring back at me could have been my senior yearbook photo. The same wide-set green eyes, the same slightly crooked nose, the same dimple that only appeared on the left side when smiling. Where did you grow up? Nadine asked, her eyes searching mine desperately, like she was trying to see past 28 years of someone else's life. Right here in Millbrook, born and raised. The words felt like cotton in my mouth. My mother died when I was 2. Car accident on Route 49. Black ice. What was her name? Nadine pressed. Sherry Matthews. Nadine was already typing on her phone. There's no record of a Sherry Matthews dying in a car accident in Pennsylvania in 1998 or 1999. I've searched every database, every newspaper archive. I know because I've searched for every dead woman who might have been raising my daughter. My dad stood abruptly. We're not doing this. Not here. Not at my mother's funeral. Brenna, the service is starting soon. But Nadine grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Please, just one more question. Do you have any baby photos? From before you were 1? The question hit me like cold water. I'd never really thought about it before. But she was right. Every photo in our family album started when I was about 2 years old. Dad's explanation had always made sense. The basement flooded when I was 3, destroyed everything stored down there, including the photo albums and my baby clothes. We'd lost so much in that flood, he'd said. Insurance had covered the water heater and the foundation damage, but not the memories. Dad, I whispered, turning to look at him. This woman thinks I'm her stolen daughter. We should talk about this later, Dad said firmly, not meeting my eyes. His jaw was clenched the way it got when he was trying not to say something he'd regret. There's more, Nadine said, pulling out another photo from her purse. Her hands were steadier now, like she'd found her purpose after decades of searching. This is Harmony's father, my late husband, Jerome. He had a hereditary condition called syndactyly, webbed toes on his left foot. The doctors said it skips generations, but when it appears, it's always the left foot, always the second and third toes. The blood drained from my face. I felt Trevor's hand on my back, steady and warm, but it couldn't stop the room from tilting. I had webbed toes on my left foot, second and third toes partially connected by skin. The doctor had mentioned it was genetic when I'd asked about it in high school, embarrassed about how my feet looked in sandals. Dad had said it must have come from my mother's side, though he'd never seen it in her family. Lots of people have that condition, Dad said, but his voice cracked on the word people. 1 in 2,500, Nadine replied immediately. And how many of those also have the same birthmark, the same scar, the same face as my daughter would have? How many were born within 6 months of when Harmony was taken? The funeral director approached our pew, bending down to whisper that the service would begin in 5 minutes. The organist had switched to playing Amazing Grace, and people were settling into their seats, pulling out tissues, preparing for grief. But I was already drowning in a different kind of loss entirely. I need air, I said, standing up so quickly that the pew creaked. I need to get out of here. Brenna, please. Dad reached for my arm, but I pulled away. Don't touch me. The words came out sharper than I intended. Aunt Vera gasped. People were starting to stare. I walked out of the sanctuary with as much composure as I could manage, my heels clicking against the old wooden floors. Behind me, I heard Trevor making excuses, something about me being overwhelmed with grief. Then I heard more footsteps, Dad, Nadine, Trevor, all following me out into the February cold. The church parking lot was full, cars lined up like dominoes under a gray sky threatening snow. I leaned against Dad's old Ford truck, the one he'd taught me to drive in when I was 16, the one we'd used to move my stuff to college, the one that had been part of every major moment of my life. We need to talk now, I said, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. After the burial, sweetheart, Dad tried again, using the voice he'd used when I was little and scared of thunderstorms. Number right now, because that woman has evidence that I might be her kidnapped daughter, and you're acting like you already knew that. Dad's face went through a series of expressions I'd never seen before. Fear, guilt, resignation, and something that looked horribly like relief. He unlocked the truck with shaking hands. Get in, all of you, NTC team. I took the passenger seat, the same spot I'd occupied for 28 years. Nadine climbed into the back seat on the driver's side, and Trevor took the other side. Dad gripped the steering wheel without starting the engine, his knuckles white against the worn leather. Dad, who was my mother? Really? The question came out steady, which surprised me. Inside, I was screaming. He stared through the windshield at the church where his mother's body lay in a casket, where 200 people were waiting for us to return, where a life built on lies was about to collapse. Your mother, the woman I told you was your mother, was my girlfriend, Sherry. She was real. She did exist. She helped me raise you from when you were about 8 months old until you were almost 3. She died in a car accident in Ohio, not Pennsylvania. We weren't married, but it was easier to let you believe she was your biological mother. Then who gave birth to me? My voice was rising. Who am I? You're my daughter, he said firmly, finally meeting my eyes. You've been my daughter since you were 6 months old. But not biologically, Nadine said from the back seat. It wasn't a question. Dad's shoulders sagged like someone had cut the strings holding him up. Number not biologically. I didn't steal you, Dad said quickly, turning to look at Nadine in the rearview mirror. His eyes were wet now, something I'd only seen twice before, when Grandma got her cancer diagnosis and when he'd walked me down the aisle. I need you both to understand that. I didn't steal her. Then how did you get my baby? Nadine's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm destroys everything in its path. Dad pressed his palms against his eyes for a moment, then began speaking in a rush, like if he didn't get it all out now, he never would. My brother Wyatt, you have to understand, he wasn't a good man. He'd been in and out of jail since he was 17. Drugs, theft, assault. He got mixed up with some bad people in Philadelphia, owed money to the wrong folks, serious money, the kind of debt that gets you killed. Trevor squeezed my hand from the back seat. I couldn't squeeze back. I couldn't move at all. One night in August 1996, he showed up at my apartment at 2 a.m. I was living in Scranton then, working construction, barely making ends meet. He had a baby with him. You. He said he needed me to watch you for a few days, that your mother was sick and couldn't take care of you. He gave me a diaper bag with some formula and clothes, $200 in cash, and a piece of paper with the name Brenna written on it. That's not her name, Nadine whispered. Her name is Harmony. I know that now. I figured it out 3 weeks later when Wyatt had disappeared completely. I was 27 years old, single, living in a 1-bedroom apartment with barely enough money to feed myself, and suddenly I had a baby. I tried calling Wyatt for days. His phone was disconnected. I went to his last known address, but his landlord said he'd skipped town, owing 3 months' rent. Dad turned the heater on. The warm air felt suffocating, but none of us moved to turn it down. I was getting ready to take you to child services when I saw the news. A baby stolen from Riverside 2 hours away, 6 months old. The age matched, the description matched. They showed a photo of the birthmark. I knew immediately. I knew what Wyatt had done. And you kept her anyway? Nadine's calm was cracking now. You knew I was out there searching for my baby and you kept her? I panicked. I was young and stupid and terrified. I thought if I took you to the police, they'd think I was involved. Wyatt was my brother. We had the same last name. I'd already had you for 3 weeks. Who would believe I didn't know? I thought I'd go to prison. So you chose yourself over my daughter. Nadine was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. No, I chose her. Dad turned to look at me fully. I looked at this baby who hadn't asked for any of this, who needed someone to take care of her, and I made a decision. Maybe it was the wrong one. It probably was. But I packed everything I owned into this truck, drove to Millbrook where I had a cousin who could get me work, and started over. With someone else's child, I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. With a child who needed a father. I legally changed your last name to mine through a lawyer who didn't ask too many questions, told everyone your mother had died and I had full custody, created a whole history, birth certificate, social security number, the works. It was easier than you'd think in the 90s, before everything was digital. What happened to Wyatt? Trevor asked, the first time he'd spoken since we'd gotten in the truck. He died in prison 5 years later, killed by another inmate over a gambling debt. By then you were in kindergarten. You called me Daddy. You had friends, a life, a home. How could I destroy all that? How could I tell this 5-year-old girl that her whole life was a lie? The same way you're telling this 28-year-old woman now, I said, the anger finally breaking through the shock. With words, with truth, with basic human decency. Every birthday, Nadine said from the back seat. Every single birthday for 28 years, I baked a cake. I sang happy birthday to an empty chair. I kept her room exactly as it was the night she was taken. My marriage fell apart. Jerome died thinking our baby was dead. My other children grew up in the shadow of a ghost sister, and you were here, playing house with my daughter. The DNA test confirmed what we all already knew. I was Harmony Rose Thorne. Nadine was my biological mother. The man I'd called Dad my entire life had no biological connection to me whatsoever. The results came back on a Thursday afternoon, and I read them sitting in my classroom after all the kids had gone home, surrounded by construction paper hearts my students had made for Valentine's Day. The legal implications were more complicated than any of us expected. I met with 3 different lawyers, each one explaining how Dad could face federal kidnapping charges, even though he hadn't been the one to physically take me. The statute of limitations didn't apply to kidnapping cases. He could go to prison for the rest of his life. The decision was ultimately Nadine's to make as the victim's parent. She agonized over it for 6 weeks. I watched this woman, my biological mother, wrestle with 28 years of grief and anger against the reality that Dale had raised me with love. She met with her own therapist, her priest, her surviving family members. She even met with Dale privately once, a conversation neither of them would tell me about, though they both came out with red eyes. "He didn't take you," she finally said one afternoon over coffee at the diner on Main Street. "And destroying his life won't give me back 28 years. You love him. Despite everything, you still love him. I won't be the one to take another parent away from you." The real challenge was learning how to exist in this new reality. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in late discovery adoptees, though my situation didn't quite fit any standard category. I was grieving the loss of my identity while trying to build a new one. I was Brenna, the school teacher who grew up on Maple Street, and I was also Harmony, the stolen baby who'd been mourned for decades. Nadine and I began meeting every Wednesday for lunch. She brought photo albums filled with pictures of the life I should have had. My biological father, Jerome, a high school math teacher who'd played guitar in a local band on weekends. He died of a heart attack 3 years after I disappeared, and Nadine said the grief had weakened him. My younger siblings, Celine and Foster, born into a family haunted by my absence. Celine was a nurse now, married with twin boys. Foster was finishing law school. They'd grown up seeing my baby picture on the mantle every day, praying for a sister they'd never met. Meeting them was surreal. Celine looked like me, or I looked like her, same green eyes and crooked nose. Foster had the same laugh, quick and sudden, catching you off guard. They were angry at first, not at me, but at the situation, at Dale, at the years stolen from all of us. But slowly, carefully, we began building something. Not quite siblings, but not strangers either. Dale sold his house and moved to a smaller place across town. He knew he needed to give me space to build a relationship with my biological family. We still talked, but every conversation carried the weight of 28 years of deception. He'd been at every important moment of my life. Every soccer game where I'd scored the winning goal, every school play where I'd forgotten my lines, every nightmare that had sent me padding down the hallway to his room. He was the one who'd taught me to drive, to change a tire, to throw a curveball. He'd walked me down the aisle at my wedding just a year ago, crying behind his sunglasses. "Love isn't that simple," my therapist said during one of our sessions. "It's possible to be furious with someone and still love them. It's possible for someone to do something unforgivable and still be a good parent in every other way." Trevor struggled with it too. His father-in-law was now potentially a kidnapper. The man he'd asked for permission to marry me had no legal right to give it. But Trevor stood by me through all of it, even when I'd wake up at 3 a.m. crying, not sure which name was really mine. 3 months after Grandma Rosalie's funeral, we all met for dinner at a restaurant halfway between Millbrook and Riverside. Dale, Nadine, Celine, Foster, Trevor, and me. It was awkward and painful and strangely healing. The waitress asked if we were celebrating something, and nobody knew how to answer. Celine said something that night that stuck with me. "You got stolen from us, but you didn't grow up unloved. That's more than some stolen children get. It doesn't make it right, but maybe it makes it survivable." Nadine gave me a necklace for my 29th birthday. My first birthday she'd been able to celebrate with me since I was 6 months old. It was a small gold heart with harmony engraved on one side and Brenna on the other. "You're both," she said. "You'll always be both." The scar above my lip turned out to be from crawling into a coffee table the week before I was taken. Nadine had kept the hospital bill from the stitches, along with every other piece of paper from my first 6 months of life, my first immunization records, the receipt for my crib, the little hospital bracelet from when I was born. She'd kept it all in a box labeled "When Harmony Comes Home." I found out Grandma Rosalie had known the truth all along. Dale finally admitted she'd figured it out when I was about 10, noticed the birthmark matched the missing baby from the news years before. She'd confronted him, and he'd confessed everything, but she'd kept his secret, choosing her son and the granddaughter she'd grown to love over the truth. In her final days, when the cancer had spread to her brain and she was barely conscious, she'd gripped my hand and whispered, "Tell Nadine I'm sorry." I hadn't understood then. Now those words haunt me. Some nights I lie awake thinking about the sliding doors of it all. If Wyatt hadn't owed money to dangerous people, if he'd taken me to a different brother, or no brother at all, if Dale had been brave enough to call the police that first night, if Nadine hadn't seen that obituary online, if she'd sat in a different pew or arrived 5 minutes later, or decided not to come at all. But mostly, I think about how we're all just doing our best with impossible choices. Dale chose love over law, and that choice defined 3 decades of our lives. Nadine chose forgiveness over revenge, though she had every right to choose differently. And me? I'm choosing to build something new from the wreckage of 2 families, one built on loss, one built on lies, but both, somehow, built on love. We still meet for dinner once a month, all of us. This strange patchwork family brought together by crime and circumstance. Dale brings his famous cornbread, Nadine brings photo albums, Celine brings her twins, who call me Aunt Brenna because Aunt Harmony is too hard for them to say. Foster brings his law school stories and his careful optimism. Trevor brings his patience and his steady presence, anchoring me when I feel like I'm floating between 2 lives. The truth is, there's no clean ending to this story, no moment where everything suddenly makes sense. There's just learning to live with complicated truths. I'm Brenna, and I'm Harmony. Dale is my dad, and he's not my father. Nadine is my mother, and she's still partly a stranger. I was stolen, and I was loved. I was a victim, and so was everyone else. I still teach 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary. Sometimes I look at my students and wonder what secrets their families hold, what truths are buried under years of good intentions and desperate choices. I've learned that every family has its mysteries, its shared conspiracies of silence. Mine just happened to be bigger than most. Last week, one of my students asked me why I have 2 names on my coffee mug, Brenna on one side and Harmony on the other. I told her it's because sometimes we get to be more than one person in our lives. Sometimes we get to choose who we become, even when we don't get to choose where we come from. She seemed satisfied with that answer, and slowly, day by day, so am I. If this story touched you or made you think about the complexity of family, identity, and the choices we make, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps these important stories reach more people. And if you want to hear more real, raw, and powerful stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experience with family secrets or discovering unexpected truths. Remember, every family has its story, and sometimes the most complicated ones teach us the most about love, forgiveness, and what it really means to belong.